Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and we've once again reached that spooky time of year, which means it's time to once again dive into the wild and aptly named world of Chaos Comics with Cremator number 2. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in January of 1999, this is a super cool cover, but more importantly, it's a super cool wraparound cover. And as I stated in my variant covers episode, this is something I need to make sure to focus more on when I'm actually making my videos on these specific issues. So we're going to take a look at that wraparound cover right now. And as you can see, this is a super cool over-the-top cover. We've got Cremator here just fighting to absolute exhaustion against a massive Wraith army that has him surrounded on all sides, armed to the teeth. I love, too, that Cremator's weapon is literally a flail, the head of which is a skull with spikes coming out of it. At no point did they ever try to not be the most over-the-top version of what they wanted to show in these comic books. I got to applaud Chaos for just being, to the extent that they knew no bounds. They were just like, let's do it. This, yes, put it in, add it, edgelord, edgelord, edgelord all the time. This is who we are, this is what we do. Plotted, written, and illustrated by Leonardo Jimenez. Scripting, Leonardo Jimenez and Brian Pulido. Colorist, Roy Young. Color assist, Leonardo Jimenez and Roy Young. I'm not exactly certain how Roy can assist himself as a colorist, but okay, sure. Editors, Brian Pulido, Brad Gould. Lettering, Comicraft. Graphic design, Jay Armburst. The story starts off in August 8th of 1941, deep in the heart of Nazi Germany, where the Third Reich is in the middle of conducting an occult experiment, as they seem to have 5 Allied soldiers strung up over top of what appears to be a well, hanging from some sort of diabolical machinery, as a scientist walks up and starts injecting them with a strange glowing liquid, one of which is named Captain Fairchild, no relation to anyone in Gen 13. But the captain starts to struggle and the scientist tells him to stop. Now, what is this green liquid that glows that they're being injected with? I have no idea. It's never explained at any point during this issue or addressed past this page, so your guess is as good as mine. Also, what are the Nazis up to? Well, nothing good, I'd assume, but we're going to find out on the next page. What do you know, folks? I was 100% correct. The Nazis were indeed up to no good. Shocking, I know. It turns out that they're actually trying to summon a demon from hell so that they can strike a deal with said demon to make the Third Reich invincible and conquer the world. As one of the sorcerers that they've brought in starts to cast a spell, he tells all of the others in the room to stand within their assigned pentagrams, and no matter what, never leave those pentagrams. We also see that another sorcerer starts to pierce the sides of several of the captured soldiers, and they then begin to bleed into the well below them. The other sorcerer then starts to repeat an incantation in Latin because Latin is, in fact, the only language you can officially summon demons with. As he continues to recite his incantation, he eventually summons the demon Cyranus, who is an archduke of the 7th level of hell. Cyranus is quite angry at being summoned until he happens to notice that one of the sorcerers is in fact wielding the Spear of Destiny. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Spear of Destiny, according to legend, is the spear that was used by a Roman soldier to pierce the side of Christ as he hung on the cross, making it a holy artifact, I guess, is what it's supposed to be. I don't get that deep into the idea of like the holy artifact stuff like that. That's more of a Catholic thing. I'm not Catholic, but according to legend, that's the case. Cyranus then starts to be a little bit more accommodating to the sorcerers and asks how he may be of assistance to them. As Cyrenius continues to converse with the sorcerer, one of the soldiers in the room is not too happy about what's going on. He doesn't believe that they should be striking deals with demons. At this point, a deal has been struck, and Cyrenius instructs the other demons in the room to grab the 5 men being sacrificed and prepare to take them back to hell, as they are going to grant power to the Third Reich. As the soldier, who's not too pleased about the demon dealings, starts to light his cigarette, he is approached by someone else. And this someone else is none other than Pagan, the court jester of hell. Pagan decides that he's going to interrupt this entire little shindig as he pushes one of the soldiers out of his pentagram. At this point, one of the sorcerers starts to scream, "No, no, stay inside of the pentagrams." But Pagan runs around the room and continues to push and kick all of the soldiers and sorcerers out of their pentagrams, which allows them to be assaulted by all of the demons in the room, who immediately start to attack and murder them. There's just one problem with all of this. If the pentagrams are supposed to be protecting all of the men in this room from being even accosted or touched by demons, how was Pagan able to make contact with any of them? He himself is a demon, therefore the pentagrams should have protected them from him as well, as we even noticed that Cyrenius was not able to do anything to any of them. So this is just like a huge plot hole. It doesn't make any sense that Pagan was able to go around and do any of this and throw a wrench in the entire plan. The sorcerer wielding the Spear of Destiny realizes now that the jig is up and things have gone completely haywire. At this point, he decides to try and escape, believing that the spear will offer him protection from all of the demons in the room. However, in his haste to try and get away, he doesn't notice that Captain Fairchild has fallen to the ground beside him and trips over him, dropping the spear in the process. At this point, the sorcerer becomes enraged and even blames Fairchild for all of the wrongs that have happened today, despite the fact that Fairchild was nothing more than a prisoner of war, and all of this was completely concocted by the Nazis themselves, but hey, why take responsibility for your actions? And he pulls a gun on Fairchild in an attempt to murder him. However, he fails to notice that he's being approached rather quickly from behind by Cyrenius himself, who immediately bends down and chomps down on the sorcerer and begins to eat him. Captain Fairchild is quite understandably very upset and distraught by seeing all of this, as he makes an attempt to run away, grabbing the Spear of Destiny in the process. At this point, Cyrenius starts to utter an incantation where he calls upon the devils of the wind to create a vortex that will suck all of the creatures in the room back through the portal to hell that he is currently in the middle of. He intends on making sure that no one leaves here and that he's able to claim the souls of all of the humans in the room. However, in doing so, he doesn't quite pay attention to where Captain Fairchild or the spear are located, and fails to notice that Captain Fairchild is flying straight towards him and then plunges the spear directly into his chest. This releases a huge explosion of energy that throws Captain Fairchild across the room, as he realizes that this is his moment to try and escape if he's going to do so. We then get a 2-page vertical spread because apparently Brian Pulido called in Rob Liefeld to help out with page layouts for this issue. We see that Captain Fairchild continues to make his escape as he leaps over the bodies of all of the dead German soldiers, and as he turns back, he is cursed by the final words of the demon Cyrenius. As Cyrenius states, "I will have my revenge upon the world through you." We then see that Captain Fairchild leaps from the castle before it is finally destroyed by the death of the demon, and he realizes that he's escaped. Now, this, as far as I can tell, is supposed to be the origin of how Evil Ernie came to be eventually, and that Captain Fairchild is perhaps his grandfather. That's not fully explained, and you may be wondering to yourself, well, Bo, what does any of this have to do with the story of Cremator? It kind of doesn't, and it definitely doesn't tie into the rest of this issue, which now suddenly teleports us right back to hell, where we see that Cremator is still engaged in battle with the Wraith army. As he states, "I will not fail." Cremator, despite being outnumbered thousands to one, continues to fight on as we see he has suffered rather extensive damage, as we see dozens of arrows sticking out of him. He's got cuts all over him. He's bleeding profusely, but he continues to fight on with this super cool mace and sword knife type of thing. I don't know exactly what that is. And the Wraiths do their best to try and mob him and overwhelm him, as we see several of them plunge their spears into him. However, this does not cause Cremator to give up, as he ignites himself in flame and then transfers that flame to all of the Wraiths that have stabbed him, igniting them as well. They're incinerated immediately, as we see dragons flying overhead, as the riders of said dragons start to rain arrows down upon him. However, Cremator only snickers at this, stating, "You're not out of my reach," as he then creates fire in his hands and launches it up at the dragons above. Also, given that Cremator is a condemned soul who has already died on the mortal plane, what exactly happens to him if he dies in the afterlife? This is not really fully explained, and is always kind of a huge plot hole for stories that involve heaven and hell like this, and it doesn't really tell us what happens to hellborn or heavenborn inhabitants that die, or people who die and then go to these afterlife planes. What happens to them when they die? It's kind of a little bit of an issue in the writing that's always kind of in the background whenever these types of stories are featured in comic books. I know I'm kind of nitpicking, but it's something that's always in the back of my head of like, hey, everyone here is technically either immortal or already dead, so how do you kill them exactly? As the battle continues, we see the Wraith army do their best to try and subdue Cremator, as they try to just flood in from all sides and completely overwhelm him. They do manage to dogpile on top of him. However, they are wrong in thinking that they have the upper hand, as we see Cremator start to ignite himself once again and unleash a huge fire blast explosion that just torches all of the Wraiths that were piled on top of him. We then see him smoldering as he grabs a nearby battle axe and shield and continues his onslaught, as he actually starts to taunt the Wraith army, screaming, "Fight, damn you, fight," as if they're just not giving it their all already, despite the fact that he's covered in arrows and has been stabbed and cut and is bleeding. He doesn't care. In his mind, this isn't enough. He wants more. He wants them to fight with everything they have as he continues to hack them to pieces. We then notice that this entire battle is actually being observed from a faraway place by some figures we haven't been clearly introduced to as of yet, who are pondering whether or not Cremator poses any sort of threat to them. However, they believe at this point that really he doesn't, which is kind of surprising given what they're watching as he mows down an army single-handedly. As it turns out, the people who are monitoring the battle between the Wraith army and Cremator are in fact the Archdukes of the 7th level of Hell. And they're in the midst of a power struggle between all of them, trying to figure out exactly what the next move should be in the absence of Lucifer after his destruction. The main argument is happening between two of the Archdukes. However, I'm going to give you a rundown of all of their names. Please bear with me, as most of their names are pretty weird, and there are quite a lot of them, as you can see. Starting over here from the left, we have Neural, then Abraxas, Bethagor, Belgana, Gamora, Seer, Honorex, Glaciabolus, Sodom, Zazzle, Nelphim, and Pharaoh. The main opposition is between Pharaoh and Abraxas. The two of them are arguing. Abraxas believes that they should remain loyal to Lucifer and try and figure out a way to resurrect him so that he can once again take the throne of hell and restore order. However, Pharaoh completely disagrees with this, as he thinks that they should instead just collectively rule over hell together and not worry about trying to bring Lucifer back. He even states that he believes it to be an impossibility. However, Abraxas will not hear any of this, as he states that them trying to rule as a collective would never work, and none of them can ever agree on anything, and only under Lucifer's rule can order actually be restored to hell. And he starts to gain some supporters as Befagor and Belgana state that they're with Abraxas. He then points over to Seer and tells him that if they don't restore order quickly, even the condemned souls will start to rise up against them and challenge their power. However, at this point, the discussion is interrupted when a mysterious figure known by the name of Talia enters the room and tells them that she represents Zaxel, Archduke of the third level of Hell. Now, if you remember back in issue 1, Zaxel was in fact killed by the mad angel Apollyon. So we now have to question, is Talia truly representing Zaxel and they're on a diplomatic mission, not realizing that her master's been killed? Or is she cleverly playing a trick on all of these archdukes and using this moment to try and advance her own goals? We then see that Glaciabalus tells her that their time is precious, so she should not waste it or she'll incur their wrath. So she quickly starts to explain to them that she has a means by which they can resurrect Lucifer, as she holds up a book and states that they can use this to resurrect him and also control him, meaning they can once again unify hell under Lucifer's rule, when in reality they'd all be the ones pulling the string and that they would be absolutely unstoppable after this happens. Meanwhile, back in the battle between Cremator and the Wraith army, we see that Cremator has gone full berserk mode as he keeps himself completely engulfed in flames, jumping through the hordes of Wraiths, cutting them, slashing them, barreling through them as he sets them ablaze on contact. He is just completely lost in his bloodlust, as he at one point just gives up on the weapons altogether and throws the axe into the crowd as it just cuts through everything it hits, as we see it splitting some of the Wraiths' heads in half, cutting them in half at the torso. He then states that the fires of hell burn within him, as we see flame pouring out of his mouth and fireballs forming in his hands. He then starts to punch Wraiths and cause them to explode in flame as we see their skeletons, as he leaps over the crowd, jumping into the fray, holding nothing back. He's not even trying to escape at this point. He's just literally going full-on rage mode, as he is planning on apparently killing the entire Wraith army on his own. Cremator then continues to taunt the Wraith army as he states, "I am Cremator, you hear me? Cross me and you'll get burned," as we see him unleash one explosive flame attack after another, shooting fireballs into the Wraith army as we see thousands of them being mowed down at a time, their bodies being thrown through the air, and many of them just fleeing on fire as all of their skin and flesh is burned off. We even see that much of the structure and cave system of the part of hell they're in is collapsing due to the ferocity of the attacks that Cremator is unleashing upon them. And it seems at this point that the Wraith army may be faltering in terms of trying to decide whether or not they should be in full retreat at this point, as Cremator's power seems to be far past anything they can deal with. We then see that this entire battle is also being watched by the mysterious figure who found the Crystal of Zettel and made a scepter out of it using Zettel's hand as a mount for said crystal. As the figure pulls back his cloak, we find out that it is in fact pagan, or pagan, I'm pretty sure it's pagan, and he is covered in scars, and this is because he suffered a horrific defeat at the hands of none other than Evil Ernie, who apparently decapitated him. How Pagan survived this, I'm not certain. Though he is doing his best to heal, unfortunately, this is a fool's errand, as he realizes his condition is worsening as he leans over and vomits blood, and that the only way he'll be able to save himself is if he can offer up a sacrifice A great bloody sacrifice, as he puts it, as he looks into the crystal and sees a large tower. Meanwhile, at the base of the structure that the 7th level archdukes are all arguing in, we see that there's a full-blown riot happening between lower demons and the condemned souls of hell, and that the complete social order of hell is really beginning to break down at this point. This is all being witnessed by Talia, who thinks to herself that they're all fighting for nothing and it's ridiculous. She then walks back into the room where the archdukes of the 7th level are arguing and thinks to herself, yes, these fools are doing the same. At this point, all of the archdukes are in agreement with Talia's plan, save for Seer, who states that it's impossible for Lucifer to be resurrected and that this whole thing is a fool's errand. However, all of the other archdukes vote in favor of trying to resurrect Lucifer and seize power of hell using him as their conduit, and Seer states that he will not go along with this plan. Upon hearing his vote, Abraxas tells Seer that he's quite disappointed in him and that he always considered him to be a cornerstone of the archdukes, but now he wonders why he remains so loyal to Lucifer. Seer simply responds by stating that he remains loyal to Lucifer even in his absence. At this point, Abraxas washes his hands of the whole thing, stating that Lucifer was nothing more than the father of lies. However, Seer becomes enraged and starts to glow with energy as he makes one last plea to the other archdukes, telling them all that there are forces at work that are unknown here, and he believes something is quite wrong in all of this. However, this falls on deaf ears as the other archdukes decide to go along with Talia or Thalia's plan. I'm not entirely sure how to say this. I've been saying Talia, and I'm going to keep saying it that way. And tell her to go ahead and start the ritual. She immediately begins the incantation and has the book that she brought with her levitating above her as it emits energy. She continues to recite the incantation, all in Latin, because, as I stated before in this episode, Latin is apparently the official language of how to summon a demon. As she continues with the ritual and begins to levitate, we see that a large horned figure appears from the shadows that screams out, "Who dares?" As we see Talia look back with a ghoulish smile on her face, she tells the archdukes, "Prepare yourselves, lords and ladies." However, all of the archdukes of the 7th level are shocked and terrified as they see that Talia did not, in fact, summon Lucifer. She instead summoned Astaroth, the Grand Duke of Hell, who is quite enraged at the goings-on that have happened in Lucifer's absence. And we see Talia taunting all of the other archdukes, stating, "Are you surprised, traitors?" as we reach the end of the story in this issue. We then get an advertisement for the Undertaker comic from Chaos Comics. I vaguely remember when this came out, though I've never read or even seen an issue of this in real life, though if I ever had a chance to buy this series, I probably would just for the sheer hilarity of it. But I do seem to have an inkling that this sort of thing may have been what contributed to the downfall of Chaos Comics ultimately. We then get to 2 full pages of impending chaos. This is not a letter section. This is just a general information section about what was going on with Chaos Comics at the time, where Brian Pulido essentially just gives us a rundown. Now, where I just said before that I thought the Undertaker comic may have contributed to the ultimate downfall of Chaos Comics, what I mean by that is, if you remember back when I made my episode on Cremator number 1, I stated that Chaos Comics went out of business and declared bankruptcy in 2002. You can go back and watch that episode for the full rundown of all the events that were taking place during that time period. But it's kind of obvious in 1999 that they were already having financial struggles. One of the main reasons that I bring this up is, even in this impending chaos section, Brian lets us know that the upcoming Evil Ernie issues are going to be print to order, meaning they're only going to print the exact number of comics that people are ordering. This means they're not trying to attract new readers by having these books just on the shelf. They're only supplying to the readers that they already have, which isn't really a good sign in terms of where they were at financially at this point. It's kind of lending itself to the idea that they were hemorrhaging money and they had no extra cash to spare, meaning that, it was literally, we can only print stuff on the express knowledge that it's going to turn some profit for us. Now, couple that with the fact that they just paid the WWF, who is now the WWE, of course, however much money to license the Undertaker name and character. And then they also had a Megadeth comic that they made. Who knows how much they had to pay for that license. And you're starting to see that everything's kind of piling up, showing us that they were spending a lot, but not making a whole lot. And that this was definitely the start of the downslide that would ultimately lead to their demise. We then see an advertisement for Bill Cole Enterprises in association with Chaos Comics presents Polypack. It's literally just a 25-pack of polybags, which, understandably, polybags are not something that most people are generally buying. So I guess the idea here is like, hey, we're going to try and advertise this 25-pack of polybags for $11. And okay, cool. It seems like a weird advertisement to devote an entire page to, but then again, if they truly believe that they could make some money off of this, and as I stated, I'm pretty sure that this is when they started to really have financial troubles, it makes sense that they would go for it in that case. On the following page, we get a bunch of ads for a bunch of different Chaos comics. The aforementioned Cremator, Lady Death, Evil Ernie, Purgatory, Lady Death and Vampirella, and Smiley the Psychotic Button. Just a whole plethora of Chaos characters and books that are hard to find these days because they were not getting printed in large numbers. And I'm doing my best to find as much of Chaos as I can because I do find this company to be rather interesting, despite the fact that these were never books I was really all that drawn to in my youth. It is cool to go back and look at, what they were trying to accomplish. And as I've stated before, I do at least appreciate the fact that Chaos never tried to hide who they were. I give them credit. They devoted themselves to a specific niche in the comic book world, and they stayed that course all the way to the end. We then get 2 pages of the Chaos Collector's Corner, which is basically just a spot that you can order a bunch of different collectible, quote-unquote, Chaos merchandise. Now, most of these are just variant covers. As we see, this is an entire page of just Chastity variants, which is wild. Like, I don't recall Chastity being this popular. Definitely nowhere near as popular as Lady Death. So it seems kind of crazy that they would have this many different covers and variant books all devoted to the Chastity character, when at the same time, Evil Ernie is literally print to order. We also then get the 1999 Chaos Comics calendar, which is kind of a cool idea to have a calendar with 12 pinups of Chaos characters in it. That's a neat idea. And if I ever saw one of these, I'd absolutely pick it up. I don't think it would be any more than $1 or something, but it would be really cool to have, despite the fact that it's a calendar that's more than 25 years out of date at this point. But again, the whole thing with this much Chastity merch is kind of crazy to me. I think I've seen maybe one Chastity comic ever in my life, and it seems wild that they would have this much, full-fledged investment in a character that I don't recall being popular enough to warrant it. We then see an advertisement where you can mail away to get books of comic book fonts so that you would, as an artist, have reference to all the different specific types of comic book fonts that existed. I've, in other episodes, initially thought this was a strange idea until a friend of mine pointed out that this was something that was much more necessary back in the 90s than it is today, as you couldn't really just go online and look all this stuff up very easily. So you really did need all of these physical reference points when you were a comic book letterer in order to know exactly what fonts your editor might be looking for so that you could use them in the works. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Evil Ernie issues 8, 9, and 10, which will be written by Brian Pulido. This is a cool actual live action photo here, which, definitely a little bit more subdued than you would expect from Chaos Comics, though it does look kind of cool. And I'm not certain if this is supposed to be Evil Ernie. I believe so, given that his eyes are whited out. But nonetheless, I like the effort that they put into it, at least. And that was Cremator number 2. And as the publisher's name would suggest, this issue was in fact absolute chaos. The story is all over the place. I have no idea why it began with what I can only assume is an origin story for Evil Ernie, then jumps back into the fight between Cremator and the Wraith Army. We also then get the whole political power struggle between the Archdukes of the 7th level of Hell. And it's just back and forth. And, again, trying to keep up with all these Archduke names is crazy. There's so many of them. There could have been like 5 and we would have been fine. We didn't need like 10, 12 of them. It's a lot. It's a lot to keep up with. And a lot of it feels like, I don't want to say nonsense because that's just being dismissive. But it feels like this story could have been a lot tighter than it was. And despite the fact that the artwork is really pretty good and that it's action-packed, there's a lot of this story where you just kind of feel like you're struggling to keep up and you're not exactly sure what it is they're trying to convey here. Now, there are 3 more issues to this miniseries, so this could easily be wrapped up with a neat little bow. But given what we've seen in the first 2 issues, I have a sneaking suspicion that the story doesn't necessarily get better or less complex as we go on. However, these are just my opinions. I could be totally wrong about my predictions, and your opinions may be completely different. You might think that this story was fantastic in its layout, that you really enjoyed the Evil Ernie background that started out this issue, and that you found the political power struggle of the Archdukes to be quite intriguing, along with all of the over-the-top violence and gore that was happening between Cremator and the Wraith Army. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.